Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. And we're not going to be talking about politics so much this week. Instead, we're going to be talking about on a more personal basis. As you may or may not know, today is the first anniversary of the show, so I want to do something a bit special today. This won't be replacing the regular episode this week. As you know, that came out yesterday, but this is going to be supplementing it for those who are interested. So I want to talk a bit about my political beliefs. Firstly, I want to be clear, I will not be saying who I voted for in last year's election. I will reveal that one day, but that day is not today. Now that we've got that out of the way, what are my political beliefs? Well, they've changed a lot over the years. I've been following politics for about 9 years now. As a teenager, I was a very rebellious and countercultural, or at least I consider myself to be. I was very left-wing and consider myself to be a socialist, not a real socialist, but like a democratic socialist, like a Labour Party in the UK, something akin to like Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders and the platform that he ran on in 2016 and 2020. Now, as we approach 2019 and 2020, I became a bit less wing because many of the leading left-wing figures at that time were quite revolting, such as AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and more. That doesn't help because as a straight white man, I felt I was pushed out of the party because they were all about like diversity and inclusion, and which is nice and stuff, but they made that like the big thing, and I kind of felt pushed out of the Democratic Party. Even in my personal life, when I was on the left, I was not well liked at school because they believed that I was on the right, even though I was by no means. Even if in ninth grade somebody once accused me as if that was a horrible thing of being a Republican, and the teacher in the class said, believe me, he's not a Republican. And as we approach the pandemic, I think that's when it really flipped for me. I was okay with big government until the pandemic, and I was not happy with the government mandates, and I certainly liked how we did not like the lockdowns, and I thought that was a big mistake. I still do. As I often like to remind people, COVID didn't ruin the economy. It was the government's response to COVID. Now, as I've described on the show many times, I consider myself to be a hater, and I'm usually half joking, but I usually am contrarian. I was once asked to register as a Democrat, and I said I was too contrarian to ever do that, which is probably why I will never be elected to any office. I was pro-Biden in 2020 because I was anti-Trump. Trump had 4 years of chaos, and I didn't really like Biden, but I didn't believe any other Democrat would have won in 2020, and I still believe that to this day. But as we know, Biden winning in 2020 basically made Trump a victory in 2024 much more likely, whereas if Trump had won another term, Democrats would have dumped the terrible economy on him, as Democrats have done to Bush Sr., Reagan, Ford, etc. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off track here. So by the end of 2021, as we were approaching the end of the pandemic, I was very right-wing. If you had asked me at the time, I would have said, oh no, I'm center-right. But no, I was pretty right-wing. And I would have still said center-right, but that was mostly in response to the Biden administration's failures. They were not letting COVID go. They were implementing their stupid vaccine mandates, which thankfully were rejected by the courts. They continued to extend the student loan payment pause, which I thought was ridiculous. And there was the war in Afghanistan that had ended so terribly, and then eventually in early 2022 there was the invasion of Ukraine, which the Biden administration kept going back and forth on. Was the sanctions supposed to be preventative, or were they supposed to be a punishment? They went back and forth. And unemployment was rising, or unemployment was still high, and inflation was going up. Those were the two big things for me. And there was also, as I said, the war in Afghanistan. That was probably the big thing, and that really pissed me off. Once I got to college, I became more centrist today. I encountered people, they kind of pulled me back to the center. I'm persuadable. It really, I'm mostly persuaded depending on what happens in the world around me. I'm not somebody who remains fixed on my beliefs. I'll go back and forth depending on what happens as we get more information. And that is why I am so unhappy with the state of politics. I will say, though, unlike most people, I am very self-aware of my beliefs, and that some of them are considered extreme, and most extremists don't believe that they're extreme. Most extremists believe that they are normal, and everybody else is extreme. There was once a town hall I've heard about, and I've never independently verified this, so take this with a grain of salt. I believe that it was Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was at a town hall in her constituency in Northwest Georgia, where she was asked, how many of you think that Mitch McConnell is a socialist? And almost everyone raised their hand. Obviously, Mitch McConnell is not a socialist. But think about it from the perspective of a right-wing extremist. If you are an extremist and you believe that you are the center, or on the center right, people to your left are going to be left-wing in your mind, even if this is not true. Many people in this country believe that left-wing equals socialist, which is also not true. This is dangerous because this subconsciously allows people to move further and further to the extreme. This happens on both ends. And they still believe that what they believe is normal. If you're on the left, for example, if you're on like an AOC, you are definitely left-wing. I wouldn't say you're far left, but you're definitely left. And if you believe you are to the center, then people who support Trump are going to be like fascists, which kind of explains the polarization that you see in America today, because people are so pulled on their side. When they look at the other side, they're so far from the center, they look on the other side and they're like, oh, they're extremists, when in fact they are also extremists. There isn't as many good examples on the left, but if you're Bernie Sanders and you believe you're moderate, then you really need to take a look at the political spectrum and think about that. You are not where most of the country is. And that's the same thing if you are somebody who is like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anyway, going back to my point, I believe some of my beliefs are extreme, but only because our politicians of the day have not solved the issue. For example, on immigration, I'm an absolute hardliner. Zero illegal immigration should be tolerated. If somebody's crossing into the border, they should immediately be turned around. There should be no, we cannot have this. But at the same time, a left-wing belief that I have would be to expand the judiciary to allow easier processing for legal immigration. On economics, I consider myself to be a very centrist person. I believe that the government does have a role in our society. I'm kind of a Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema. They're not in office anymore, but they were recently. I focus on social responsibility, and I support moderate welfare policies. I believe there's a role for the state, as I've said, to provide opportunities for citizens in education, for example. Where I draw the line, I'm not sure. I kind of move it back and forth, but I support, of course, pre-K through 12, but I'm not supporting a free college. For example, if you're a Brit, I would be considered like a One Nation conservative. About 8% of my viewers are British, so if you're familiar with that, that's kind of where I would be. I'm definitely not like a Boris Johnson kind of person, but they've totally gutted the welfare state. And in America, we've heard a lot about compassionate conservatism, which was Bush's big thing for a long time. And I prefer to call myself a tough liberal, one that believes in addressing inequality but strong punishments for those who break the law and don't respect social order or society. On social issues, I'm also quite right-wing. I'm against trans rights. I'm okay with gay marriage, but not a supporter of it. I'm generally against drug legalization, although even more recently I've gone back on that because at this point, like, drugs are basically everything except the stuff that will actually kill you should probably be legal. Marijuana should probably be legal. It's so common. I live in Pennsylvania. Medical marijuana is legal here, but not recreational. And there's marijuana shops popping up all over the place. And it's like, are you kidding me? At this point, this is just a joke. I think DEI is a scam. Prison sentences should be longer and harsher, in my opinion. Expanding the death penalty is generally what I support for everyone serving life in prison. I'm also against restricting free speech or hate speech, but I'm not crazy enough to think that the Bible should be taught in schools except alongside other religious texts in a specific class. So I took a world religions class in high school. Obviously, that's where you would want to put the Bible in there so that you can compare it to other religious texts, but not as like this is something everybody should follow. And on the foreign policy front, I'm definitely an isolationist. I prefer to let Europe and other nations do their thing. I support NATO. I don't support the World Health Organization. I don't support the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the AUKUS Defense Pact. At the same time, I'd like to see a smaller military and defense department, about half the size that it currently is, maybe less. The Defense Department has failed 7 years of audits, and that's as I wrote the script a little while ago, so it might even be 8. Meaning they can't tell us for the last 7 years where every dollar they spent went. Which proves to me there is a huge amount of corruption going on, and I definitely hope DOGE investigates that. As for the UN, I think it was a good idea in theory, but not in practice. I don't support leaving the United Nations. I consider myself to be a pragmatic remainer, one that wishes the UN didn't exist, but believes that we should be a part of it because it does exist. What role do I think our government should play in our lives? Well, to sum it up, I think on social issues, it should be to respect gender norms of thousands of years while also respecting the rights of women, and it should of women, and it should also shy away from racial justice and other DEI policies. On the economy, I believe it has a role to play to reducing child poverty and other kinds of poverty while also keeping taxes as low as possible where feasible, although I believe we need higher taxes than we have now because in order to remain fiscally solvent. Where I think in general government is too big. I usually believe that government should be as big as people want it to be in their lives. If somebody supports free college, then we could have that as long as they are willing to pay higher taxes for the rest of their life in order to pay for that. Same with a public option for healthcare. If you want to be in the government healthcare, that should be an option, and you should pay for that through your taxes. And only you should pay for that, not everybody else. Hopefully that doesn't sound contradictory, but I do believe, as I said, there is a role for government in our lives in a mixed economy. I'll add that my views, of course, are up for change, as I've said before. I try very hard to surround myself with different-minded people because I'm aware that being in an echo chamber is not the right place to be. I have some socially conservative friends, socially liberal friends, economically conservative friends, economically liberal friends, all over the place. I have friends all over the political spectrum, except for people on the extremes because they're quite intolerable. As I say, though, I have no problem talking to anybody, and they usually don't want to talk to me. That's usually how it is. Especially even when I was on the left, people who were on the left didn't want to talk to me. And when I was on the right, people on the right didn't want to talk to me. They found that I was too extreme or not extreme enough. That's usually what they believe. One example is trans rights. When I refuse to call trans people by their preferred pronouns, they are usually the ones to stop talking to me and not the other way around, which is kind of why these days I don't even bother talking to them. And so now that you understand some of my beliefs, that's it in a nutshell. I hope that it helps you understand why I am so dissatisfied with politics, and I often switch between parties, because if I go to the Democrats, some of my wishes will be addressed, but the others won't be, and vice versa. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you for a wonderful but crazy year. I'm so happy with the small gathering we have here, and I personally accomplished so much, both on this show and in my life. And for example, I will be graduating in December of this year. For this show, I'd like to keep expanding our user base, and I'd like to think that I've improved quite a lot in the last year, and I will keep working hard to improve as time goes on. Lastly, as a young person myself, I can vouch for my generation when I say that, and perhaps the one that's older than me, when I say that we're looking for authenticity, and that is something I'm always aware of, and when I'm writing, recording, and editing this podcast. I pledge to you that I will be authentic as humanly possible, as I have for the past year. As always, thank you for listening, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and you will hear from me next week. Bye-bye.